hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of D-Pod. We are bringing back the BTS series, Behind the Staff. And today I have in the studio with me, Josh Yeung. Hey, Josh.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to D-Pod. I just learned from you earlier that this is your first time ever recording with us. I think there was a period like 2 years ago where I was intending to go through all the international stuff, and it just kind of stopped at some point.
Oh yeah. That was like Brandon, I think 2 years ago. And then we're like, when are we gonna get on here? It's like, but yeah, finally glad we're here now.
We got the invitation. We re-extended the invitation, and yeah, we weren't trying to silence them or anything. It's just we just got busy.
yeah, for sure.
Nice. Okay, so Josh is leading our international side of things. So we call it the ISF ministry here, and him and his wife Nancy have been leading that, especially after we sent off some friends this past year. So wanted to just hear from him and a little bit of his spiritual background. So could you just start with a just basic introduction of yourself, just your family right now, where you guys are working, stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. So me and my family, my wife's Nancy, and we have a baby boy. His name is Micah. He's 1.5 years, and we're neighbors with DP and Cata, just 2 blocks down over here at Greenwood as well.
2 doors down, actually.
Oh, 2 doors. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It just literally takes like 10 seconds to walk across.
10 seconds. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But like DP said, like we've been serving with our church since I graduated. So I graduated in 2014. My wife graduated in 2016. And then we actually met while serving in IUSM, which is the International Student Fellowship over in Berkeley. And that's how we got to know each other. We got married in 2020, and then in 2021, we jumped at the opportunity to serve on a church plant and start a similar group for international students here in the Midwest. So that's when we moved out here to Chicago in 2021.
Okay. So when you moved out here, you were recently married, like about a year or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you were both in Berkeley, and then moved out to Chicago, and I had Micah here, right? So yeah, that's awesome. I know growing up, you've moved around a lot. Could you give us a little bit of a sense for where you've grown up, where you've been throughout your life, like I guess before Berkeley?
Yeah. So kind of like I guess there's a short and long story, but I guess to keep things short, I was born in the Midwest, actually. I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because my dad did his PhD there in organizational behavior. But yeah, I guess long story short, we moved from Michigan to SF, San Francisco Bay Area, back to Michigan, and then Taipei, Hong Kong, Taipei, and then back to Hong Kong, and then to Shanghai. And then I finally moved back to the U.S. When I was 18 to pursue my undergrad at UC Berkeley. So kind of my average stay per place was like 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So moved around a lot, mainly for like dad's job. But yeah, that was kind of my upbringing.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, that reminds me of my childhood a little bit, because, I think it was like I moved like 13 times in the first 18 years of my life or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But how did that affect you? Or like, what was that like? Because you were moving like internationally. So that's like even bigger than some of my moves. So
yeah. I think the time of it was like pretty difficult. I think the hardest move was probably when I made that final, I guess, move from Hong Kong to Shanghai when I was in middle school. And that's when I felt like, I have like my friends. But then I'm like, oh man, we have to move again. And that probably hurt the most. But I guess like now that I'm like, 30 something and looking back, I'm actually really thankful for the upbringing I had, because that really helped me to be in some ways more adaptable and kind of like, that's what we call like a third culture kid, where you're not really rooted in any culture, but you're pretty flexible. But I think kind of like the downside, or maybe like a side effect of it too, is that, just growing up, I didn't see relationships as something that's like very permanent. It's kind of like, okay, I gotta just understand, okay, I'm just gonna be here for maybe 2.5 years until the next thing, then we'll just move on. So yeah, we'll just help each other out how we can, but there's not really a sense of like, we're gonna be like lifelong friends or anything like that.
Do you feel like it actually affected your, like, did you actually kind of got tired of investing into friendships or something like that? Like, do you actually feel like that was like an intentional thing that happened?
Yeah, totally. Actually, when I got to move to Shanghai, actually me and my sister in our first year there, were like, I don't know if it's like a weird sort of rebellion, but we're like, hey, we're not going to make any friends. We're just going to be friends with ourselves.
Oh, interesting.
And it's because, we're tired of like making friends.
And that was like high school.
Yeah, that was like high school.
High school. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow. And you and your sister together made that decision.
Yeah, I mean that didn't last very long.
Oh.
We both made a lot of friends by in 3 months, but,
I see,
but yeah, it was kind of like a kind
Right.
of passive, resentful, rebellious.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's like the way that you could like retain some control of your life, as you kept getting moved around.
something like that.
Just curious, like for an ignorant American like me, I hear like moving from Hong Kong to Shanghai, and I'm like, oh well, it seems similar. I mean, but aside from the fact that, of course, like you're moving, so then you're gonna lose contact with people. But what were some like other differences between those places for you, or like were there like cultural differences? Like
Yeah. I think even Taipei, Hong Kong, and Shanghai are all really different. I really enjoyed living in Taipei because it's kind of like the countryside. People are like really nice, and and like their food is obviously amazing. I love Taiwanese food, but like Hong Kong for me, like that's kind of like home because that's where all my my relatives, my grandparents, they're also there. My parents still live there too, and yeah, but it's also like a crazy big city. It's super expensive to live in, super crowded, very fast paced. But mainland China, like Shanghai, it's like a totally different vibe as well. It's also a really big city, but like the culture, the food, kind of like, even like things like how do you like get in line for something? It's like a totally different system. And if you're not like,
I see.
Yeah, even for like foreigners, we kind of joke. It's like if you can't live in mainland China for more than 6 months, and it doesn't like drive you crazy, then you probably shouldn't live here in the long run.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's totally different.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that perspective. I still haven't visited China, so I really want to visit actually one day.
Oh yeah,
That'd be
for
really
sure.
cool. There's like so much to learn. I mean, it has most of the world's people there, right? So, So a big part of what we do during the BTS episodes is to kind of dive a little bit into your faith story and your spiritual background. So could you maybe talk about that? Like what was your interaction with spiritual life or faith, Christianity growing up?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate to grow up in a Christian family. Actually, my mom, she became a Christian in her elementary school in Hong Kong. I think she grew up in like a Christian, elementary school. And then, it's a very simple faith story. But then my dad became Christian in college because he liked my mom, but then he wasn't Christian and he saw she was going to church. So that's how he started going to church. And he became Christian through that. So I guess kind of a missionary dating kind of story.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the kind of family.
Except he was the one pursuing.
Yeah.
It was like reverse missionary dating.
Yeah, it works both ways, man. But yeah, that's kind of like the family that I grew up in. So I grew up going to church, just even though we moved around, even like to Hong Kong, mainland China. Just kept on going to church throughout that period. But I think it was really in my like sophomore, junior year of high school. That's when I started taking like AP Bio, like physics. And I was just really seeing that, science does explain a lot of things. And I think even back then, I think my faith was kind of like a simple faith. It's like, oh, I grew up with Christianity, then it has to be true. But then, like more and more, my perspective changed to the point where it's like, maybe God's existence is kind of like Mount Everest. Like I know it's out there somewhere, and I think it's there, but whether it's true or not doesn't really have a very personal or like, it's not a very central thing that affects my day-to-day life. And so kind of like with that perspective, I kind of just like gradually like fall away. I'm like, oh, this is not something that's very important. And I'll go to church. My parents want me to. But actually in my senior year of high school, I actually made it. I kind of pretty explicit to my parents. I'm like, I don't want to come to church anymore because I feel like I'm just doing this to please you. And it's not really my own like faith. And I think there was a bit of a struggle there too. But in the end, they respected my decision. And that was kind of mindset that I entered into college.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, I feel like some people might be feeling that internally to just this is your faith, this is not my faith, but then they don't get to a place where they're actually like explicitly saying that, but you actually got to that point where you even like told your parents. And was that on your part? Like, was that to just be upfront with them, or was it to like gain some time back because you just didn't want to go to church, or what motivated you to actually express that to your parents? Yeah,
I think it was a bit of both. Like, because I was also taking like a lot of APs, and I remember bringing my AP US history book to youth group. So it's like even before, like you have to like hang out time before like the thing starts. So I'm not even talking to anyone. I'm just like reading my 8-push book until the thing actually starts. I'm like, okay, fine. And I fold it close. And, but then at some point I'm just like, this really isn't like worth it. And like, if I'm just coming here just to appease my parents and I'm not really getting much out of it, I think that's something I just have to be honest with my parents. And I'm thankful they heard me out. And looking back, they always told me, I'll talk about this later in my spiritual journey too. But looking back, there's like, they were really worried for me. Like during high school, they're like, like what's going to happen if he just stops going to church and all these things. But I think in some ways when I made it more clear and I had more ownership over my decisions. And so when I later became a Christian in college, then I think I really owned that decision as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about what happened in college then. So, you told your parents not doing this anymore. This is your faith. I know you started coming back to church a little later in college. So take us through kind of what that transition into college looked like.
Yeah. So when I got into Berkeley, I was like super ecstatic. I'm like, I can finally be away from my church friends, my family. I can do whatever I want. Just very typical like freedom mindset. So I joined a lot of social clubs. I don't know if people know, like there's a Hong Kong Students Association. There's a Taiwanese Student Association. There's a Taiwanese American Student Association. There's like CPU, Chinese People Union.
You joined all of those?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, wow.
Because I was actually
was it like a Shanghai International Student Organization too?
Oh, no, not for Shanghai. But there was a group for my high school specifically.
Oh, wow.
Like Shanghai High School International Division.
Oh, interesting.
There's a small group of them too.
Wow.
But I was, because I moved around a lot growing up. So I don't really have like a social group that I was like, like who am I really? So I kind of went through this identity crisis in my freshman year. And then slowly I realized actually I don't fit into any group really. And then, I guess like in my second semester of freshman year, some of my friends, they got recruited to join this fraternity, or it's more like restarting a fraternity. And they invited me, and there was like 24 of us who became founding fathers of this fraternity. It's called Delta Sigma Phi. I think it's probably still around in Berkeley. But so that was kind of like my core group for the first 2 years of college. But later I think by the time of my junior year, I was just engrossed in a lot of different things, whether it's like pursuing academics, but also I got really into gaming, played a lot of League of Legends. LoL came out in my freshman year.
Oh, okay.
And I was repressed like throughout my high school, and just like a very Chinese, traditional family.
You got to study, so you can't play games.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just went all out in my first few years of college, and but I think at the end of it, I just felt really empty many nights. And then like I said, I joined a fraternity as well, and there's like the whole social scene and all that. But I just remember like late at night, like 2 or 3 a.m., it would just be like buzzed, or it's from just from all the things that happened that night. I would just like lie awake staring at the ceiling and just be like, man, what just happened? I just feel so hollow and empty.
Yeah.
And I think so there's like that aspect of emptiness from the whole social scene. But I think even with the gaming addiction, I didn't really see that as a problem necessarily until I remember there was this one incident where me and my friend, like Min, we've been living together for like the past 3 years. Our friends since freshman year. And there's one time that he knocked on my door, and I was like in the middle of a game, and like late into the night. He was, I don't remember exactly what he was asking help with. He's like, hey, can you help me with something? And I was like, oh, sorry, I'm busy. I need to finish this game. And then there's just like a long, awkward pause. And I just hear him say, you changed, bro. And he just walks away.
Oh, man. Yeah. Wow.
And and that kind of like struck me, because I'm like, wow, what kind of person have I become? Where like I don't even value friends, and I'm like, wow, I'm really a selfish and very proud person, and because of this gaming thing, it really exposed a lot of things that were actually inside all along, but I just didn't see very clearly. So I think it's with that backdrop of just a sense of emptiness and just seeing what kind of person I am. That kind of made me think more about what is the purpose of life. And, maybe it's also because we're approaching our senior year, about to look for jobs and internships. And that just made me think, like, what is the point of life?
Yeah.
I just thought about, if I end up being very successful versus I'm just like a homeless person on the street. But like 70 years from now, we're all going to die one day. And I can't take anything with me. Like, what was the point of all of that? Yeah, so I don't know. Like, maybe these things aren't entirely like linked together, but I think they're just like kind of mounting pressure.
Yeah.
And I think these were the things that I was kind of wrestling with. And it just made me think more about like if there is a purpose of life, then like God would exist.
Yeah.
And that made me also investigate the question of God. And I started reading a lot more about, both atheism and Christianity.
Okay. So is this kind of, I guess, emotional, mental, spiritual struggle that is beginning? Is this happening? This is happening before you came to church, right? Before you started out church, or is it sort of happening at the same time?
I think it was all during college.
Okay,
yeah, like kind of freshman, junior, sophomore, junior year.
Okay, before you were like active in church again, right? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, wow, I think it's neat that you had a friend who was able to express to you like, bro, you've changed. Like, I know it might have just been a side comment. He might not have thought much of it, but I feel like that kind of thing, I mean, I hope it still happens. I have a sneaking suspicion that doesn't happen as much anymore because people, I think, are afraid to expect things from each other. But at least that was still an era in which, and you had someone in your life that expected something out of you. And and he was able to detect that, you know, this gaming thing's like taking over your life, or like, man, you've changed. And so, man, I just think that's really poignant. And there's something like beautiful about that, and cause you to seek. I also think it's interesting that you seem like you must have been spiritually hungry at the time. You must have been spiritually hungry, because I feel like people could go through what you were going through, like, you know, just the scene that you're describing after, you know, the frat event, and you're come back and you're like lying in bed and wondering what happened. But then your approach to that seems to have been like very thoughtful, like, and kind of cause you to introspect. Do you feel like that's like a personality thing that you have, or do you think that other people, I don't know, do you feel like your friends that were experiencing that at the same time like had similar experiences? And why do you think you kind of responded in the way that you did? I sometimes wonder about this, because like I do look at that scene and I'm like, yeah, you should feel like, is this what life's about? But then not everyone responds that way. You get what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So what other factors do you think were happening for you? Or maybe it is the fact that you were just spiritually hungry at the time, but yeah, just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but maybe it has to do with my upbringing, because I was raised in a like pretty conservative Christian, you know, family background. And so I think even growing up, even though I did have like my rebellious tendencies, even in high school, I would like go to bars and things like that. But I would have a sense it's like, oh, like this isn't really right. And then, so I think even when I kind of went off into deep end in college, I think there was still a sense that I know like what is good and what is, what I grew up with. Like, and I kind of deviate from there. So there's might have been a sense of like a guilty conscience from that as well. But maybe looking back, it also might have been the prayers of like my mom and many of my Christian friends too. Because even leading up to my salvation decision later in college, my mom would often mention to me, it's like, like I prayed for you a lot. And and you know, maybe that has impact as well. And that was an answer to prayer. So
and I appreciate that perspective. Because I think our culture would maybe, because I agree with your answer. I feel like it must have something to do with you receiving a scripture as a child, learning Bible stories, being raised in that environment. And I think it gave you, or it properly aligned your conscience. I think that's maybe the way that I would put it. And, but in our world, I feel like people would say, oh, but that's just like, you're just being told what to do, or like those are such like antiquated values or whatever. And like people are not free unless they're just authentically living out their desires or something like that. But I feel like that kind of postmodern way of viewing our values and upbringing is actually really devoid of meaning ultimately. I feel like that's the exact kind of reasoning that has caused a lot of moral chaos in our world, and people not knowing what up and down is, left and right is, and not knowing where to take their life. And it causes like a lot of existential angst actually, because there's no one saying this is the right way to live. But as a Christian, we have this ability, which is to always turn back to scripture and say, well, God says this is what the right way to live is. And if God is creator, then he should know that. And you know, kind of, I guess in hindsight, like us talking together now, we can see, oh, God's standards, which you received as a young child, that kind of lay dormant inside of your soul until it was ready to be activated at the right time. And like it says in Romans, like it caused you to feel guilt. If like the law produced guilt and shame inside of you,
right,
which then produced in you a desire for the genuine gospel, right? So I think that's interesting. I think that's really fascinating that you experienced that working out in your life. So yeah. So take us through, like, okay, so you were going through that, and then eventually you made it to church. I don't know if you came straight to our church in Berkeley, but how did that journey happen?
Yeah, actually, the first church I went to was one called Living Water.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that was because my mom came with me. Well, not just my mom, like my whole family came with me to settle me in at Berkeley, which, yeah, looking back, it's actually like a very privileged position. Not many international students have their family.
Oh yeah, they all came. Huh?
Yeah,
wow,
usually
that's amazing.
You just come by yourself. But right, they all came to help me settle down. And yeah, one of the top things that was on my mom's mind is like, we have to go to your upperclassmen's church. So there was this other guy who was 1 year older than me. He serves at Living Water. So okay, yeah, you should go to his church. So I checked out one day. I was like, yeah, I'll come back. And then I even got this mentor's phone number, and he would like message me. He's like, hey, Kay, we're at Foothill now. We're gonna pick you guys up. And I just like never responded.
Oh no.
Yeah, I was one of those guys.
You're a bad man. You're a bad man.
Yeah, once mom's gone, I'm out of here.
Oh gosh. That's funny.
Yeah, so that was my first exposure. But
you should apologize to those Living Water people.
I know. I feel really bad about that. Yeah, sorry, David's son. But later in my junior year, after I went through all those things that made me want to seek again. Yeah, I had friends who were from Hong Kong and mainland China who you're part of our church as well at the time. So I was asking them, hey, can I come to church with you guys one of these days? And so they brought me out, and that's when I started coming out in the spring of my junior year, which is 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then from there, like, kind of take us through like how you became. I know you made like a significant decision, right? So in your upperclassmen years, what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah. So I just remember that first Bible study that I went to at our church. It was like Kenny Choi. I forget what the exactly Bible study was. Something about like open doors, like the whole Monsters theme, Monsters Inc. theme. It's like the doors and stuff.
Interesting.
But yeah, I think somehow that got me interested, and I was just looking at how can I learn more about Christianity, and they pitched this foundations course called Course 101, which our church continues to offer. So I took it with Albert Locke, who's now serving in SoCal. I was taking it with another guy from Hong Kong, actually. But I think in the end, it was just me who stuck around. And then I think it was on Pi Day of 2013. Yeah, April 13th, that I made my decision after finishing chapter 6, and just felt really, burdened and convicted by my own sin. Kind of like what I talked about, like the addiction. But I think more than that, it's just even like the envy, the pride, comparison. I saw that all within me. And I just felt very helpless to change who I am. And also sense that, these sins aren't just things that I feel bad about myself, but God also must feel very offended and, burdened by, these sins that I sin against him with. So that was kind of like the turning point, and that's when I made my decision at that night. And I just remember Albert Locke we all celebrated. We got some boba at Sweethearts afterwards. That's always a very sweet place in my heart.
I see what you did there. Oh gosh, Agape would really like that.
Oh yeah, it's for you, Agape.
Oh man. Okay, so I have a very important clarification to make, because you said Pi Day, but then you said April 13th.
Oh, sorry, March 14th. Yeah.
Okay, so it is March 14th.
Yeah,
okay, so it is actually Pi Day. Okay,
Pi Day.
Okay, yeah, I'm just kidding. That wasn't the important clarification, but so I want to ask you about this, because you have a pretty significant church background. And then, so for you, making a decision to follow Jesus, did you feel any drama about that? Like, oh, like I said, I was Christian before, or was it because you had explicitly said, like, I'm not going to church? Like, was that a little easier for you to accept that, you know what, I'm actually not Christian? Like, a lot of people have to struggle with that. So just wanted to get your take on what that experience was like.
So when I got to college, my first 2 years of college, I was still calling myself a Christian. So if people ask me, I would say, yeah, I'm Christian, but I just don't go to church. But by my junior year, you know, after I was going through all those things, that actually got me thinking, like, I shouldn't call myself a Christian if I don't believe these things. And so that's why I was reading a lot, you know, of like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. And I was actually trying to kind of like discard Christianity altogether. And I'm like, okay, I did the research. I'm going to be an atheist now. And I feel total peace to just move on with my life and just close that door behind me. But the funny thing is that when I started reading all these books, like the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, like I recognize that a lot of his arguments are actually like very straw man. And I wasn't actually very persuaded by them. And that made me read like Alistair McGrath's rebuttal. He called it the Dawkins Delusion. And there's like Mere Christianity and other books. And I was like, wow, they actually make pretty good arguments on both sides, but I couldn't really figure it out. And so that's why I think that was a turning point when I asked my friends, hey, can I come to a Bible study again?
Right.
Because I really need to figure this out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's amazing to me. Yeah, so I definitely sensed that you had something in your soul was hungering for more during that time. Because so and for people who don't know, like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, these were kind of the new atheists, the four horsemen of the new atheism. They were really popular in like the 90s, 2000s era. Who are the other guys? Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and there's one more guy,
astronomer guy, Carl Sagan. No,
oh man, we'll look it up later. But Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens probably being the more popular writers of those four. So so that's interesting. So you actually read them, and so Alistair McGrath's response, you read that. I remember reading that when it came out. Were there other books that were helpful for you? You mentioned Mere Christianity. Who else did you read during that time that you were seeking?
I think actually those two are the two main ones.
Okay.
And actually Mere Christianity was the one that tipped me over.
Oh, okay.
And that was actually totally by accident too.
Oh, what do you mean by it was by accident?
So I was, in my junior winter break, I was on a family vacation to Cancun. Again, like very lucky. And on that plane ride, I was sitting next to my sister and I was reading, I think it was Carl Sagan's Atheist Universe. So another atheist book. And I just finished reading it. And I'm like kind of bored. And I took it in the stove in front of me. And then when I look at my sister, she's fast asleep and she has a book tucked under her, in front of her seat. And that, I was like, oh, okay, I'll pick it up. I'll read it. And that was Mere Christianity. And once I picked up, I read through like half of it. And then like the whole argument about like us having a moral compass across societies and civilizations. People have like pretty consistent morals. I think that point really hit me. I was like, I think that moral argument is pretty powerful because I come from like a psychology and sociology background. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. That, you know, somehow we all from different backgrounds converge on these same morals. And that really is a pretty inductive reasoning for why God would exist.
Right. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. So Mere Christianity, that's the one by C.S. Lewis. So if you guys haven't read that, highly recommend. That's like probably in the top 5 books you should read, you know, written in the last century. So the fourth horseman I just looked up real quick is Sam Harris. I've never read any of his stuff, but I've seen his like YouTube stuff. But anyways, so you became Christian, and like that. Just to insert my thoughts here about, you know, people who grew up in church, call themselves Christian, you know, admitting that you weren't a Christian is hard, right? So that's hard. That hurts your ego, hurts your pride. But truth is a good place to be. So then I think I really appreciate that in your story, you're able to identify, well, you know what? Like, I don't actually believe this. So maybe I should stop calling myself a Christian. That is in my book, that's a huge step forward, because then at least you're labeling yourself correctly and you know where to go. right? Because if you're actually not a Christian and you keep calling yourself a Christian, then it's really confusing. Because if you're a Christian, then you should do Christian stuff. Like you should behave like a beloved child of God.
Right.
But then if you're not a beloved child of God, then you can't act like one. So it's really confusing. Yeah. So it's always good to name what actually is, and even if it's hard. So I just want to just commend you for that in your story. So as you think about college, as you now live out your faith, okay, so now you're living out and working out the implications of your salvation. What is like a high point as you think about that? And then what was like a low point, like a struggle and like, so.
Yeah. I think what high point was in 2014, my mentor, Kenny Choi, and, his wife, like led our peer class to North Carolina for a vision trip. So vision trips are like kind of these trips that we go to like a new campus or a new college town to kind of explore and maybe, get some more intel and kind of get a feel for what that campus is like, and maybe our church would like plant church there.
Yeah.
And shortly after we did plant church there as well. But yeah, I just find that trip like I have very fond memories of that trip, because this was like shortly after I became Christian. And I remember there was a conversation I had with, I think, a student at UNC. And I was like, he was asking me about like, oh, what does it mean to be Christian? And like, can you share about your story? And I got to share my testimony with him. And I was like, wow, this is so amazing that I just became Christian like 6 months ago. And I get to share my story with someone who is having similar doubts and similar thoughts on his life. And I could kind of nudge him towards a little bit closer. So I just, that was a very memorable moment for me.
Wow. Yeah. And then as you kind of lived out Christian life, what were some low points that happened for you? Some struggles? Yeah,
one would be, also in 2014. So this is my senior year, and that's when me and my friends were starting to think about like our futures, like where are we going to be, what were we going to do for work. And I think the housing was a particular big struggle for me because by then I already got the offer to work at my dream job, which is a consulting job at Towers Watson. So it's like a HR consulting job.
Oh, Towers Watson, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Exec comp, benefits. Yeah.
I had a friend who worked for Towers Watson.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And then, so they're based in SF, and, it's going to be like a 10-15% travel kind of job. So it just made sense for me to live in SF, to be close to work, close to the airport. But at the same time, I also felt like there was a tension because, our church is based in Alameda, and usually people just all live together there. And that's a lot easier to live out, a church community and just to be in each other's lives. But at that point, I already, more like my family already put the escrow in to buy this house in SF. And I was already like, we already had like money like involved. But I remember the day of winter retreat, I just felt like such unrest and a lack of peace with this decision, because I know deep in my heart, like the reason why I want to live here, other than, appeasing my parents and the job situation, it is to have kind of like an arm's distance away from the church and from like my friends. So I can still kind of do what I want and people don't have to be too involved in my life. And in some ways it's like keeping an arm's distance away from God as well. So I prayed about it, and then just through different conversations with like my friends and just reading even John Piper's Desiring God. I just felt really convicted. It's like, I'm really doing this out of like kind of like selfish and kind of like sinful motivations. And in the end, I called my parents, and then they called the real estate agent and say, hey, we're going to call this off. So that was hard. We lost some money, and my parents were, but in the end, they're supportive as well. They understand, like, they're Christians, and they're like, I understand if you don't feel peace with this decision. And but I'm really glad I made that decision though, because a few months later down the line, that's when Mike and Joanna, they're the pastors. I think they're in East Coast now, but they first moved to Santa Barbara.
They're back in Berkeley now.
Oh, they're back in Berkeley. Okay.
Mike's back.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no, it's confusing.
But at first in 2014, they were going to move to Santa Barbara to start the church there.
Right.
And so they had to like sell the house in Alameda. And at that point, that was also like perfect opportunity because it's a good location. It's a big house for a bunch of single guys to live in. And so, they talked to me. It's like, would your family be interested in buying this house? And because we didn't buy that house in SF, then we're like, like we can consider this. And in the end, we we bought it and we lived there for like 7 years with a bunch of guys. Yeah, a lot of happy memories, a lot of bros fellowship,
Yeah.
late night wrestling,
Yeah.
all that. So yeah, looking back, that was a really good decision. I'm really glad. Yeah, I made that to prioritize God.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. Like I really like that example as a struggle, because it's not, I mean, there's the, I'm glad you brought this one up, because, there's the kind of obvious struggles that sometimes come up, struggles with like lust, or struggles with like, ambition. And, I'm sure those kinds of things also happened. But here, this is a softer issue, because this is like, it's not like you were like gonna not be a Christian suddenly. Like, you were just moving to a house close to your job, which feels like the most natural thing in the world. Like, what's wrong with that? Except that, again, you were reflective enough, and you understood your heart's motivations enough to, I guess, identify that, there's something more going on here besides just a pure, I mean, I guess even if it was a purely practical decision, we could say something about that in terms of maybe a lack of perspective in terms of building God's kingdom. But more than that, you sensed like a desire to withdraw, or a desire to have independence, a desire to, something like that, right? And so, yeah, so I think that's really neat. And then you followed your conviction on that, and even went as far as to actually stop the escrow on that property. Yeah. And I remember the house that you guys ended up getting in Alameda, which, I've actually slept over in the house multiple times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for various things when, people get hosted in Alameda. Yeah, so I've slept there before, right across from Rick and Sue's place.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So, man, okay, so I mean, gosh, like there's only so much we can talk about in an hour. So we're gonna kind of just fast forward a little bit here, and I want to talk about missions, because I know you've had experience going on missions. You've had experience going on short-term missions, like, just like a couple-week trips. You've also been out on mission field for a year and a half, 2 years?
Like 1 year.
Oh, 1 year. Okay, 1 year. Yeah. So you've had that experience. And so what, just tell me about like, where did that heart begin, and kind of, we'll take this wherever you want to go with it. But what is the thing that you would want to share about your interaction with the mission field?
Yeah, so I think it started. Yeah, I think I've always like known about like missionaries and people of faith who have like gone out, but like to me that they've always been like these really incredible people who, somehow like, got like pointed by God, or they saw like a country's name appear on their cereal, and they, had a very clear conviction about like being sent. So I never thought like, that was really for me. But then, I remember we had like a team retreat back in 2017. It was about like missionaries, and reading the stories of like Hudson Taylor and Gladys Aylward. They're just like really normal people. Like even Gladys Aylward, she was like totally uneducated, but she had this really big, burden for like the Great Commission, and specifically, China was placed on her heart. And even though she didn't like have any money or good education, but she really made it work to like, take this like one-way train and like ship ride to make it to China. And, it's a really incredible story, but I just felt very moved that like these, like Westerners who have nothing to do with like East Asia, or like, in Asia in general, that they would, be compelled enough into let go of everything in order to share the gospel. Like that's how precious the gospel is. And I think about my own upbringing. I just grew up in, both in US and in Asia, and just seeing that, I come from a background where I can, do more work in that area, and I have the background. I'm, my family has, kind of like cultural, background to do that too. So, so I think that was the kind of first seed that was planted there. And then, so when there was an opportunity to go on a mission trip, this was in Thailand in summer of 2017, I think. I just jumped on it, and it was, a very eye-opening experience. I just remember seeing like so this is at AIT, and there were students from like Burma, from India, and like campuses like packed at the DC, and I was thinking, wow, these are all people who are majority Buddhist or Hindu. And when I approached them and, shared with them, not just about US, but also about Christianity, they're like, oh, I've never heard of Christianity, and I can get to be that first person to
crazy.
share with them the gospel. So yeah, I just found a lot of joy, and I was like, wow, like, yeah, God can use someone like me to introduce the gospel to people who have never heard it, and I found that, yeah, to be really amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we went to Thailand that same summer. I think.
We went right after you.
Yeah. We were team 1. You guys were team 2. Yeah, and that just interesting thing about that international campus was that we were in Thailand, but we met people from all over South Asia. It was crazy, and just interacting with so many people who have just never ever talked to a Christian before. Like, that was wild, and it just gave me a sense for how much need there is still in the world. So. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on, well, let me ask you about this. Cause you ended up doing a year stint in Asia as well. So was that decision, what was that decision-making process like to actually sign up for that team and to go out there? You put a hold on your career for a year.
So I think it came down to like maybe 2 or 3 things. Like, one was the retreat that, I mentioned in 2017, like just seeing the examples of missionaries, people of faith who had nothing to do with like that area of the world to like go out there and to share the gospel. I just felt like how much more, as someone who is like, from Asian descent, and, I have like, the financial means, and I'm educated, and I can like, go out there. So how could I not, when so many people have like poured out their lives and, shared the gospel. And, when I look at my parents' story, right, they became Christians through other people who established, Christian schools and things like that. And that, the ripple effect, it really came from people like Hudson Taylor and Gladys Aylward.
Right.
So we were, in some ways, direct benefactors of their acts of sacrifice and acts of faith. So I just felt like a personal connection, like with, these missionaries, and I want to continue their legacy. So I think that's one thing. But then I think also, I just thought that in my stage of life, at the time I was still single, and I was probably working at the best job I ever worked at. It was at Salesforce. We were working in the same building.
Yeah.
You're on the 8th floor.
It's a great company.
Yeah, it's awesome. But I was also thinking, like, at this stage of my life, like, when will I ever be this, I guess, in some ways free? Like, I'm not married yet. I don't have kids. I can put my life on hold for 1 year to serve God. And I'm really glad I did. And because I think taking that step of faith really helped me see, wow, I really grew it in my perspective of like how much need there is out there.
Yeah.
And not working for 1 year, like I didn't die. And I think, just seeing, I myself like felt like I was carried by a lot of people's prayers, because I just remember my friends and people back in Berkeley, they would say, oh, we're praying for you. We're thinking about you. And and they also share in some ways that they feel strengthened and encouraged by, our acts of faith, and they're trying to hold down the fort and trying to do the best that they can. So I feel like there's that sense of like that New Testament of like the churches encouraging and supporting one another, even as we take steps of faith together.
Yeah, it's neat because, gosh, in some ways you got to be part of that first phase of foreign missions that our network started. Because up until then we had, we'd sent people to Asia before, for like 1 year, 2 year stints. But generally most people's experience had been just going on like these 2 week, 3 week, maybe like if it's long, like a month mission trip. And that was like an area where people could take a step of faith, and it still is. But now, like, from the precursor to when was that? Was 2018, right? 2018. Yeah. So, and, last year, as many people know who listen to this podcast, we sent out a bunch of friends, like 100 plus, people into the foreign mission field, 7 different, is it 6 or 7? I can never keep track of the number of countries, but a bunch of countries. And like, they're out there for a year, and it's kind of a new frontier of a way that people can take a step of faith. Right. And, I think that, as we keep doing this, as we keep learning from this, of course, then it's going to involve, actually, church plants in foreign countries, and actually learning to figure out how to do that. Right. So I only see how, as people build on and take steps of faith upon the shoulders of those who went a little bit before them. God will continue to extend what as a network we can do as we kind of obediently take steps of faith together. So yeah, I'm thankful that you got to be a part of that. And hopefully it's not the end of that. Like there's more ways that we can take steps of faith in the future as well, as God continues to lead us. So okay, last topic that I want to hit with you, which is kind of our experience here at Voyage this past year. So it's been, we're kind of like, we're fast forwarding like through like your time in Berkeley, getting married, and then you move to Chicago and have baby. Okay, so okay, now we're in 2024. Okay, so you've had the experience of being sent out in the past, right? This year you got to experience being part of a church that sends, and we sent a lot of people actually. Considering we were a relatively small church plant, we sent out a good number of our staff to foreign missions this past year. And how has that been for you? I guess. Yeah, you were on the team that sent out a lot of people. So
yeah, I mean it's a mix of a lot of emotions. Yeah. Like I just remember earlier in the spring we had like maybe 5 or 6 farewells like back to back because as people are like slowly trickling out.
Yeah.
And then I think after each one I just in some ways it's pretty sad. Of course, like we've been together here for like 3 years, like built up the international ministry, and there's a lot of shared memories that we had together. So definitely there was like sadness, but I think it was also hard because we were trying to like hold down kind of what we started together with like in some ways like less people, and there's also a sense of like pressure. It's like, oh, how are we going to keep this going? And but I think one learning was that I just see how hard it is to lead and to serve. I think even with like Brenda and Cindy, I just appreciate them a lot more for like what they did back in like from 2021 until now, and even like building up the team and kind of setting everything up for us to inherit. But just seeing like kind of day in day out, and we're kind of in some ways kind of going through the same life stage as them. Like their daughter Neo was like a little under 1 when they first came, and then my son was born. And then we inherited the team like basically when he was like 6 months or so as well. And so I was like, wow, it's not easy, like juggling family and like making a lot of decisions and kind of making things move along. So I think in that sense I learned a lot, and I just feel like I appreciate the whole team a lot more. Just even as we try to hold down the fort.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think I remember talking with you and Nancy early on, or I forget what the context was, but there was a temptation, or maybe the expectation that the team would continue to do exactly what the team did before, right, and like maintain that pace. But then the reality is that you guys went from like a team of, I forget what the number was,
like 15 or like
down
that.
to like 5, right? So it was a pretty drastic change, and I just remember thinking, no, we can't do the same things that we were doing before. We got to figure out, okay, given the people we have now, given where we are now as a ministry and as a staff team, what can we do, right? And what would it look like for us to take steps of faith together? And that's the thing with church planting, foreign missions, even new ministry initiatives that we take on here locally. It's not that we don't pay a cost. Like there's a real cost involved. So sometimes we can make it sound rosy, like, oh yeah, we send people out, and because that's the right thing to do. We actually, we believe in the Great Commission, so we should do that. And you know what? Everyone else will grow stronger as a result, and like that's true, but it doesn't mean that the ministry won't have to maybe slow down or adjust or something like as a result. And I am thankful that in a way Chicago Church gets to experience that. I think that is the way that. So even after experiencing that, we still have to be willing to keep sending people out, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be a step of faith on the part of those who are staying here. And so that's one of the ways in which we get to participate in the Great Commission, even if we're not going out. So, but yeah, on top of that, so on top of sending people out, we've also had this kind of major shift. I don't know if people, like the newer students, even appreciate kind of how different our ministry looks this year. But I think you know what I'm referring to, which is the kind of cross-domain, the merging of the domains that's been happening. And so when I say domain, what I mean is that for a number of years now in our network, we've thought of our ministry in terms of these ministry domains. So it's like an area of expertise. So for example, we have the college domain. So that, everything related to college ministry, the 4-year cycle, the undergrad, reaching undergrads at, traditional 4-year universities. That's the college domain. There's the international domain, which is undergrad to grad students, but it's specifically international students. How do we do that better? Right? How do we most effectively do that? What are the specific needs of an international student vis-a-vis, like compared to like a typical domestic college student? Right? And then there's like things like youth ministry, where there's expertise. So anyways, we've really been running things by domain the past few years. We even have domain experts and domain catalysts across our network who kind of bring together the learnings from all the different churches and really help drive new strategies and initiatives, know-how, best practices, that kind of thing. And that's been super necessary. I think it's been super helpful in building out our kind of level of knowledge and expertise across our network. But then something that happened this past year in Chicago and in some of the other churches as well is that we've realized that focusing on the domains has caused us to have an artificial line in the local churches. So, like for years, the college team, we would do our thing. And then the international team, like under Brandon and Cindy, you guys would kind of have your own schedule. And it was a little weird because sometimes it felt like we were not the same church, even though like we literally live next to each other, right? So there was a lot of shared life in terms of like working together and hanging out, but then so much of our ministry and anyways, it felt really so. My point is that this year we've really tried to combine that and operate as one team. Part of that meant combining into one service. So then now we have, our college, grad students, international students, all in one service, which I've really enjoyed. I think it's been really beneficial for us. But from your perspective, how has that been? Like, what are some of your kind of observations and learnings from this past semester?
Yeah, I really echo that too. Because I remember like every Thanksgiving we would like gather all together, right? Like Evanston and Hyde Park. And then like students would ask me, it's like, oh, like what kind of gathering is this exactly? And I have to explain, oh, like there's like ISF, but there's also Voyage and there's also NUISF and they have their, I forgot what they're called, like also Voyage.
Yeah, Voyage. Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, we're like all the same church, but we're like 4 different groups. Like, even I myself have a really hard time explaining.
It's like, who are we and what is the church?
So I think just even from even experientially, like it's been a lot, I think more like cohesive to like to serve together and kind of be like kind of one church and more porous, like you said. I think some learnings, like, it's been like really good learning on, I think both sides really. Like for me, it's like, just like hopping in, like we're like doing those like kind of s'mores outreach. And I'm like, I have to relearn how to like relate with domestic undergrad students. Because I'm so used to talking to like these graduate students who are often sometimes even older than me.
Right.
And I have to like talk in like, kind of talk slower and there's, be
English,
more,
like language barriers.
Yeah, right? Language barriers. And then like when we had that, like, I think game, like a few weeks ago and talk about like different slang. I'm like, I have no idea what any of this slang is.
It's a language barrier in both directions.
Exactly.
Whether you're talking to an international student or you're talking to a college student.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think there was a lot of cross training involved, right? Like even from the domestic side too, it's like we had like trainings on like how to talk to Indian students, and Cho and Sharon came and also gave that really helpful workshop. So I think it's been really healthy, a lot of learning on both sides. But I think even from the picture of the church community, I think it's pleasing to God as well, because, we read in Revelation, it's how the church, like, or even heaven, it's like people from every tribe and nation.
Yeah.
And I think, like it's also a picture of people in different life stages. It's like you have graduate students, you have people who are working. And I think people just get to appreciate kind of like the fuller community and share different struggles and just, I don't know, I think everyone can mature more just as they see each other's lives more fully. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, I hope that, like my exhortation to any of the students who are listening to this, as we continue to figure out what it means to bring together a variety of people, like so you mentioned, people from every nation and tongue, and there's different ages, different generations. And as our church gets older, we're going to have more and more generations, which is nice. And then here's this, like, we have the different campuses. I think often also the different campuses reflect different socioeconomic backgrounds too. And so, yeah, like we're getting a good amount of diversity in our congregation that worships with us on Sunday. My hope and prayer would be that every single person there, if you consider yourself a member of Voyage, then you would do your part in trying to build that unity. Build into, so because it's supernatural to go towards the people that you feel comfortable with. I mean, that's what I would do too. I mean, that makes sense. Like, not knocking that necessarily, right? And so people are going to find similar people within the church, and I pray that you can find similar people in the church, so you feel like, oh, there's someone I can connect with. And then the step of faith, though, the kind of next step would be, hey, how can I connect across one of these lines? If I'm an undergrad, connecting with a grad student, right? If I'm like an Asian student, connecting with an African student, and as a result, man, discovering more about the world and life and how the Word of God speaks to you. And so, like, I just hope that we would together figure out what it looks like to really reflect God and His kingdom in our church. So yeah, so I'm excited for more things to come. I know that with the cross-domain stuff comes its challenges as well, because I feel like we all feel slightly busier than we were before, because that means that we're all involved in everything. So there's that too, and so we have to figure out how to handle that. But overall, I just feel like it's been a blessing, and I sensed it in the kind of the warmth that's growing within the group that worships together. So yeah, really grateful for that. Yeah. Josh, any last thoughts or any questions for me as we wrap things up?
No. Yeah. Thanks for letting me hop on.
Yeah. Well, here, maybe my final question to you is, how do you feel after recording your first D-Pod? What are you feeling right now? I
feel really thankful, like, because I didn't really get to reflect on my life story too much until recently. Yeah, we got literally like an hour when we were kind of like typing up our notes and jotting out our bullet points. Yeah. But I'm like, I had a hard time kind of reflecting back on even my college life, because that's literally like 10 years ago. Right. I have a hard time remembering. Yeah. But I'm like, wow, yeah, God has been faithful, and somehow even through all the ups and downs, like I'm still here. And yeah, I just see that, God really works through my life, and I think that's possible for any college student who really just hangs on and who tries to be, faithful to God and, experience a lot too. Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And in some ways, because you're more than a decade out of college now, in a way you have a new perspective on even what went on, in high school, college. Sometimes when we're in the weeds of things, it's hard for us to zoom out. But now you can't help but zoom out because you don't remember the details. And so then in some ways you get to see the contours of how God works in your life as a result. Right. And I think, when I hear it, I just feel like God had really worked in your life and blessed you. So yeah, I'm thankful for that. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. All right. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Deep Pod. We're going to record a few more episodes and release them over this December break. I am, verbally committing to it right now. And I think the next episode is going to be about accountability within the church. What is the role of accountability in Christian friendships? So we'll have some bros talking about that. All right. Okay. Have a Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.